Hi, I'm Rosela Mosing. I'm a somatic-based whole life leadership and presence coach.
And I'm Ellen Palmer. I'm a regenerative leadership coach and strategic advisor for purpose-driven women. We're coaches.
And also friends. Welcome to the Presence Hour.
We have cleared this hour to become present to what is and invite you to join us in a lively conversation. We'll explore what is coming up for us and illustrate how cultivating presence can help us gain new insights, perspectives, and ways forward. Let's come together and take the mystery out of presence by getting ourselves there now.
Take a deep breath into your heart, and from here, we'll begin. Well, here we are again. Welcome.
Hello.
It's so nice to be with you again today, Ellen.
It's so good to see you too, Rosela.
So do we want to jump right in with our mood check today?
That sounds good. Yeah. Where are you landing?
So I'm noticing that there's a fairly heavy dose of eagerness here with me today. A little curiosity and perhaps a touch of vulnerability.
Nice.
What about you?
Oh, I feel like I'm sitting in a lot of gratitude. I've been feeling like I have this kind of gratitude energy just like radiating, but at the same time, like the best way to describe it is like a sigh of relief, kind of like that I feel like I've landed. And maybe that's why I use that word to be like, how are you landing? Because I feel like I'm just like landing here. And really I feel present with you and in this moment. And I kind of feel like I've set everything else aside and I'm really looking forward to our conversation today.
Me too. And thank you for that. I think even just hearing you articulate that sense of arrival helped me really sort of settle in and let some of that eagerness dissipate just a little so that I can still feel the excitement, but I now feel more grounded here. So thank you. So today we, in our little discussion before we jump on to this call, we recognize that something that's been coming up a lot, at least for me, and I think is worth exploring. And like all of our conversations, we're in progress still, I think, with really fomenting our thoughts about some of this, but we want to talk about purpose today. So if it's okay, I might just launch into some of my thoughts.
Yes. Rosela and I did have a chance to chat, just like we always do a little bit. We just did a teeny bit and just scratched the surface on why purpose was on Rosela's mind. And I think, I think we'll just go from there and see where it goes.
Yeah. And so this is a big area that I actually work a lot with clients on. And it's been a focal area for my own development and growth and something I orient to pretty strongly in my life. And it's been a little bit evasive for me. And so I think that's a little bit where the vulnerability comes in, is it's something I spend a lot of time working with people on. And I have a sense of where I think I'm at, and I'm not sure always.
Yeah. Can I just pause just for a minute just to say that you're talking about like finding your purpose when you're talking about purpose? Are you in relation to your purpose?
Yeah, I think that's the way that most of us, when we start to begin to think about purpose, and I think that's part of the conversation that I want to have today, is what do we mean? How do we relate to the idea of purpose?
Yeah.
And so I think the bigger overarching umbrella is often, what is my purpose? I want to live with more purpose. I want to, and I think a lot of times when I hear people say that, what they're really saying is, I want my life to feel meaningful. I want to experience inspiration and joy and a sense of being alive. I want to feel aligned with my values. And also, I think we might have those feelings without having those articulatable thoughts. And we might not even, I know for me, so I'll just say in my journey, this
Mhm.
has been something that I've been trying to figure out and pursuing for my whole life. And, I have, and I've seen others mistake purpose and passion. Um, I've seen people conflate purpose and vocation.
Mhm.
And for me, there are a lot of these sort of templates for how do you find your purpose? And there's questions like, well, what did you enjoy doing as a child?
Mhm.
What are things you're naturally good at? What are your strengths? And I'll just say for me, a lot of those things just led me further into confusion because I don't always have the best, clearest memory of my childhood or my past, and
Mhm.
thinking about what am I good at or what are my strengths.
Mhm.
I This is something that I not only experienced myself, but I've seen in a lot of my clients is it's really easy to overlook your strengths because it
Yeah.
just comes easily to you. It's things that you don't have to effort. So you don't think of it as a strength. You just think of it as, well, that's everyone can do that.
Mhm.
Right. And so that was difficult for me. And then even sitting down to think about what are my values?
Mhm.
It's easy to think about the things that I think I should care about, but really getting into, well, how am I living my life? And what about that is driven because it's a core value to me? And about it is some sort of coping mechanism? And how do you begin to tease those things out? And how do you pick maybe 3 to 5 that are the most important when so
Mhm.
many things feel very important? And so in my journey, what I noticed is a lot of the thinking about it caused me to feel more confused and constricted. And what I noticed is doing things that just I felt drawn to or called to, or I felt my curiosity peaked. Like I can see now from this place, looking back over my life, a through line that now helps me articulate a sense of purpose for myself. And I don't think I would have gotten here without following various divergent threads that seemed unconnected and seemed to not have any real value with the paths that I thought I was on, perhaps.
Mhm.
So yeah, that's at a high level.
So can I ask a question about something you said
Yeah.
right at the like where you kind of ended that
Mhm.
you said, it wasn't helpful to you to be like, okay, here's the core values. What are your strengths? All of those things to guide you to your purpose. But can you say more about how you ultimately felt that you found, because did I get this right? That you
Yeah.
feel like you found your purpose and
Yeah.
how you did it in kind of an unconventional way that I think is bringing you new perspective on the other things now.
Yeah.
So how did you find your purpose? Just because there's so many different ways of, like you just said, some people go that core values strength route and maybe it
Yeah.
works for them, maybe it doesn't. But like you said, with clients you've experienced, it's all over the board. But so what worked for
Yeah.
you?
Yeah. So for me, um, I've just always been a follow my heart kind of person.
Mhm,
And
mhm,
so what that meant is follow my passion or, so just because I felt like I followed a few interests when I was younger. So coming out of high school, there were a couple of paths that I felt very interested in pursuing educationally and perhaps professionally. And I put myself in a position to be able to learn some of the. So one of them was I was a little bit interested in ASL, American Sign Language,
mhm,
and deaf studies, and maybe becoming a translator. And the other was theater and acting. And I'm not even sure that I always knew at the time why I was interested in those things, but they were. And so I, made myself open to as much exposure to those things as I could at that time. And then life circumstances just dictated that, well, where I lived and the relationship that I was in at the time meant that there were only 2 schools you could go to for deaf studies. And I wasn't living where one of those went. So I just thought,
mhm,
well, I'll go to school for acting.
mhm.
Right. So that wasn't really a conscious plan. It was just, this is
Yeah.
something I enjoy. And so right now I'm just going to pursue the things I'm enjoying, which may or may not have been, we can talk about how responsible or, whatever. And so for a long time, I kind of thought, well, this is my purpose or this is my passion. And the value that I didn't account for there was that one value that I know that I have is a sense of freedom,
Mhm.
and independence and that kind of thing. And so that gave me a lot of access potentially to freedom in some ways
Mhm.
and to exercising creativity. But there's no security. There's no financial freedom. There's no practical security in that.
Yeah.
And it's hard. So anyway, not to get too into it, but as I started to just then have to meet my survival needs, my life shifted. And I kept finding myself drawn to various things that had to do with personal development, things that had to do with spiritual development or um, awareness of energetic levels of reality, different things like that. And, I can see that I was drawn to various things and where I pursued it and where I didn't.
Mhm.
Um, and, for a while, things that felt like this doesn't have anything to do with what I think that I'm pursuing.
Mhm. Mhm.
Um, and it's really easy to logic your way out of, well, I shouldn't, like, now I'm on this corporate path and I'm thinking that I might be making a path for myself here. And I have this strong desire to take voice lessons. And I don't really understand why, but it seems impractical and illogical
Yeah.
to do that. And yet, it ends up leading to the next thing. So there's these
Mhm.
things that just keep leading to the next. And what I recognized that I had probably for a decade before I started pursuing the coaching path, I had an impulse towards it. I
Mhm.
had a strong curiosity about it. I felt drawn to it. I couldn't explain it. Um, I knew logically that I was interested in human psychology. I didn't quite yet have the language for being able to say that just personal development and growth was a value.
Mhm.
But I can look back now and see, even in high school or just
Mhm.
coming out of high school and early college days, that was some of my biggest collection of personal reading was all personal development and growth and getting better at relationship dynamics, getting better at understanding human psychology and development. And
Yeah.
like, I'll even say now, one of my favorite, most impactful things about studying theater in college was like, it felt like the best human psychology class I could have ever taken because it was a really embodied way to experience human behavior and what drives
Mhm.
it
Mhm.
and the impacts. And
That it is connected, those 2
yeah.
things, yeah.
So it wasn't until I started pursuing coaching that really allowed me to be able to start to have a framework and some language around, oh, so I can look back now and see the things I loved about theater were a sense of creativity, of connection with others. I I think I really valued that really good storytelling can help bring people together. It can create empathy. It can help motivate and inspire people. It can create change in the world. Those are things that feel important to me. And those are the things that I'm recognizing I love about coaching is that you're really helping yourself and others to develop their sense of what matters to them. And you're using those same things. Like every coaching conversation is an improvisational
Mhm. I love
event.
that.
Yeah, and you are connecting with other people in a really real way, And so there's through lines of the things that I loved, and there's
Mhm.
also what I can say now is it feels to me like the sense of purpose is in this. I hate using this language, but it's a one way to say it is like this ability to work towards my own self-actualization while helping
Mhm.
others,
Yeah.
work towards theirs. And
Mhm.
however different that might be, I think that's the commonality is the driving force of that, where I'm always working to be the fullest expression of my authentic self while
Mhm.
wanting to help others do that as well. And I think that ties back to a lot of the things that I've really been interested in is learning what is my fullest expression? Who am I at my core? And then how can I help others do that too? How can I help others see themselves?
Yeah.
And so, yeah, so that's one of the things is now from this point, I can tie those sorts together, but at the time I couldn't. And I also think for a long time, I was trying to tie it to a job. And it's
Mhm.
interesting to me that the
Mhm.
clarity came through a job, but also coaching is, I think, a way of being. It's not necessarily just a job. And so even if I were to move into a different vocation, this
Mhm.
way of being can stay with me.
Yeah.
And that is still living into, I think, the values that I've come to recognize that I hold, and the part of the purpose for me,
Mhm. Yeah.
right? So I just said a lot. I'd love to hear some
Yeah.
of your thoughts or
Yeah.
experiences with this.
Well, just at the end there to really to see if we could maybe pin or articulate even more closely what it was that helped you find your purpose. And what I was hearing, especially at the end, was it was like when you leaned in and followed those, like what you wanted to pursue. And you kind of described it at the end as like the expression of yourself. It felt like a true expression of you. And so was it that like following what you felt like is your truest expression then led you to your purpose, and now you can reflect and be like, okay, those core values were always there, or those strengths were there, or is that what
Yeah,
I'm
I think, yeah, but I don't even think I recognized it as that at the time. I think it was just what I experienced was a deep sense of curiosity and a profound impulse to want to move towards
yeah.
something.
And then you
And
did move towards it. Like that's what I'm like, what is the
yeah,
yeah.
yeah, eventually. So I think the other element was a building of self-trust and an external support system. So the way that it first came up was I had an encounter with someone that told me that they were a life coach, and I felt intrigued and curious about, oh, that's interesting to me. And I started to think, and then I had a couple more encounters and I started to think, oh, that's interesting. And who am I to?
Mhm. Yeah, that's why I
Right.
was like, that's like the
Yeah.
following, not following.
Yeah.
Like, should
Yeah.
I
And
that's
so,
why
yeah. And so I think I didn't follow it for probably a decade or close to that. It was a long time from my first impulse of curiosity and feeling that just internal sense of being drawn to something
Mhm.
before I could give myself permission. And in my circumstance, part of that permission came again from external circumstances that just created a situation where it was the perfect amount of support to move in that and pressure that there
Yeah.
wasn't a lot of other options for me. And so I just felt like it felt like I was getting to a point where there was like some pressure cooker energy.
Mhm.
And I kind of had to like, it kind of came out almost explosively in defense of like, there was all of this pressure to pursue other things that felt I could feel were not aligned. And the way that I could
Mhm.
feel that those things were not aligned was that there was a lot of resistance. Even though
Mhm.
logically I could argue why they were a good idea, I just felt like I could feel my heels digging in and I was like, oh, I don't want to do that.
Yeah.
Even though I knew that it probably was a good idea. Um, and none of the things that was pursuing, I think this helped. None of the things that I was contemplating were actually like the corporate job that was going to pay me
Mhm.
that. So it was, all of them would have been a risk. And so
Yeah,
it's like,
okay.
what am I willing to risk for? What do I
Mhm.
feel like I'm willing to endure these levels of potential vulnerability,
Mhm.
discomfort, some pain? Like this journey has
Mhm.
not been without some pretty deep pain
Yeah.
in the discovery of, what's important and what am I willing to do or to take on or to give up to
Mhm.
really get to know myself and make this possible.
Yeah. Can we go back
Yeah.
to when you said that really you had multiple choices, and even the one that felt like more of the truest expression of you was still had painfulness and some vulnerability, and it was still a risk.
Yeah.
But to go back to that initial, it's those forks in the road when you're trying to find your purpose that aren't like glaring signs of like, because I was kind of fed that too as a child, like, know your purpose. And I was like, how come everybody knows it but me? Like that kind of thing. Like if people who go into college are like, I'm going to be this. And I'm like,
Yeah.
oh my gosh, you're like 17 when you're applying for college. Like, really? You know what you want to do for the rest of your life?
Yeah.
Um, but going back to that trust, and you said that self trust, because you said you really were in misalignment with those other paths that whole like digging in your heels thing, that was pretty
Mhm.
intense. Like when you said
Yeah.
that, like it was
Yeah.
very clear it was a high level of resistance versus this path that was more of an expression of who you were, like in hindsight.
Mhm.
So I'm just like kind of want to go back into that, like to kind of put a spotlight on that you followed, like what helped you
Yeah.
follow? Because it also brought up in me like the shoulds.
Yeah.
Like this other version of success is like someone else's version of success and the shoulds of life.
Mhm.
And then you somehow, with self-trust in there, you mentioned,
Yeah.
followed your what was more expansive for you and less resistant, and then eventually became your expression of you, which became your
Yeah.
purpose.
Yeah.
So that moment, like what's in there?
So I think there's a few things. And it's not to discount that earlier forks didn't have that resistance. But what I noticed from the earlier forks that didn't have that resistance is when it got tough, I wasn't willing to dig in and be uncomfortable and do the hard work. I sort of
Mhm.
abandoned it.
So even the expressive path
Yeah.
w-
Yeah. So like
it's like, because no path is just like easy breezy beautiful kind of
right.
idea, right? Okay.
Right. Yeah. So like the difference when I was pursuing theater and acting, that was wonderful. It felt really expansive. I felt very aligned in a lot of ways. And when it came time to really make that my life's commitment,
Mm-hmm.
and it got hard and it was difficult to make money and it was difficult to continue to progress, I got a different job and then abandoned it. Just didn't have time, didn't have energy. Whereas with this, I found the time, I found the energy. I was willing to make the material sacrifices that I needed to make to stay on this path. So that
Mm-hmm.
was one indicator. But in the coming to this, I think a couple of things happened. So, first of all, I began to make choices a little differently. So, I began to be a little bit more thoughtful and intentional about what do I want for my life. And part of that was because I had a partner in my life that I also then had to consider. And so, how are our lives aligning? And how do I support my own growth and our growth as a couple?
Mm-hmm.
And so that kind of forced me to be a little bit more intentional with what I wanted to do or what I wanted to pursue. And so partly it was also just having that support and pressure. So
Mm-hmm.
my partner has worked for himself for most of his life. He's also one of those people that whether you call it a purpose or not, he's known what he wants to do professionally since he was a little kid. He's spent his whole life pursuing learning that skill and pursuing that professionally, and that's what he does. And so there was both support and a little bit of, I don't know, maybe unintentional, but pressure.
Mm-hmm.
And so that kind of, I think that pressure just amplified what I was already experiencing and made it more visible to me. Um, and the support gave me both practically and emotionally supportive,
Mm-hmm.
gave me a little enough space to be able to slow down and really notice what was happening for me and be at choice. When I noticed that resistance, I didn't have to just barrel through because my survival depended on it. Right. So
Mm-hmm.
in that way, I was pretty lucky to have created this situation with him for myself.
Yeah.
Um, and the other thing is, as I started to open myself up to the possibility more, so I started coming back around to, I really do think I want to do this coaching. And I was still at the, but who am I? And then it was, well, there's all these things I'm going to have to do and it requires all these resources and all these steps and all this work and time and when I finally decided I'm not sure how I'm going to do it but that is the path I want to be on and I'm going to have to start thinking about that. It's like little moments of serendipity or just doors opening. Like things just sort of felt like I was just meeting things that, I started actually looking in earnest. I had looked over the years at different coaching programs and thought, oh, I really kind of want this. And I thought that I had felt, pulled in different directions. And as soon as I decided, yeah, I really want to follow this path. And I think that this is the program that I want to do, but there's all these logistical reasons that it can't be the program.
Mm-hmm.
It's like, I was like, well, let me follow these other threads. Like, I'm not a coach yet, but I'm going to do these coach continuing education programs that are available to me in the public because they're less expensive than a coach training program. And through that, I saw a bunch of different coaches, and one of them happened to be BB Hansen, who is the principal of presence-based coaching, where you and I both trained.
Mhm.
And as soon as went and looked at that program, I just thought, we've talked about this before. It was like, oh,
Mhm.
yeah,
Yeah. So
I,
resonant.
yeah, I found it. This feels like
Mhm.
home. And the more I engaged, the more I had that sense of like settling in, arriving home.
Mhm.
And so it was kind of those little nuggets of just noticing, when do I feel supported? When do I notice a
Mhm.
sense of ease coming in? A
Mhm.
sense of like, that sense of, yeah, this feels like home. This feels right.
Mhm.
So those were the next threads I started to pull. And the more that I noticed those contrasting with the resistance that I was having, the more I became willing, even though I wasn't sure of myself yet and I
Mhm.
wasn't sure of the outcome, I became more and more willing to fight for that possibility.
Yeah. In here, the story both about your partner and about following, because you're really following what it sounded like to me is like you figured out kind of more what was pulling you forward, what is this
Mhm.
expression, and you were willing, like you just said, to fight for it. But I kind of feel like I'm hearing like you kind of identified your dream a little bit, like you were
Mhm.
like, I am drawn to that.
Mhm.
And then you kind of figured out like your why, like why that instead of like the other possible paths. And then once you
Uh,
had your why, your partner was like, this is your dream. You know your why. You got to do this, girl. Like,
yeah, yeah,
like I'm going to support you in this because you first determined your like, what is it that I'm being drawn towards? Like first noticing this is what I'm being drawn towards. And then knowing your why. Why do I want to move in that? Because I do feel resonant, because I do feel
mhm,
pulled and called, and then having the guts to go for it. Like you
yeah,
said, like even though there are hard parts and even though you were like you did have self-doubt
yeah,
and that path forward wasn't completely clear,
yeah,
like you just named. I'm just trying to summarize some of what you just said. Does that seem
yeah.
accurate or how is that?
Yeah, it does, and I think that's one of the biggest, most important things, is that I think a lot of the confusion comes not perhaps, and I'm not sure about this actually, I'm still figuring this part out, but I think that part of the confusion comes not from not knowing, but from being afraid to afraid of risking that uncertainty, afraid of like
Mhm.
going towards the thing that seems scary, or you're not quite sure,
You
you
haven't
know,
figured it all out yet?
you haven't figured it
Yeah.
all out yet. There might not be
That's
a
scary.
clear path because
Yeah.
it's your path and no one else
Yeah.
has lived your path. And so
Yeah.
there's no way to know exactly how
Mhm.
you're going to get from where you are now to where you might want
Yeah.
to go. And so I think a lot of us, I know I have in ways big and small, and I see it constantly with friends and clients, is there's a lot of limitations we put on ourselves,
Yeah.
which then convince us that we don't know what we want or it's not possible. So then we try to convince ourselves we want something different. There is also the very real aspect of, I think so many of us spend so much time doing what we should do that
Yeah.
it does become difficult to sense what we want. I think that's part of it too. But yeah, I
Yeah.
think for me, it was willing to risk the unknown and willing to fight myself, my circumstances, whatever, willing to really support myself. And I noticed that as much resistance as there was externally, which was part of, the more that I could really say solidly, no, this is what I'm doing and this is why it's important, and I'm gonna make it successful. Right? Whether I always believe that or not. And I don't, there have been lots of moments on this journey that I have been like, I don't know. Like, did I pick something that's possibly even harder to be successful at than acting? I don't know.
And what and again, back to what is your version of success?
Right.
Like if
Right.
you're doing what you love and like there's, different things that would
Right.
add to that list of what your total, picture is of what
Yeah.
success is and it can shift over time, but it's,
Right.
just to call that out again, it's that um can I say what I think is what I'm kind of like bubbling up over
Yeah. Please.
the this something that you named that I think, again, to whoever is listening, like we want like some actionable, like you're like, oh, I want that. How do you start? And so that's, I think, the story so far. So thank you for like sharing the actual story, Rosela, because I think that helps. And then bring out like, what are those pivot points that really were the turning points? And I think, like you said, everyone's kind of living in those shoulds because we're just like in forward motion. And then it's all about like taking the time to even like focus on, to even ask
Yeah.
the question. Like you said, you got curious, I remember you saying,
Mhm.
about like, what is it that I want? And even asking yourself that in the first place. And a lot of the clients that I work with, that whether it's like they come about this or this, it ends up being like, we're not living someone else's definition of success, and we don't even know who that other person is, really. It's like society or whatever, I don't know. But the even idea of like, oh my gosh, I can define my own version or definition of success. And
Yeah.
so like how that ties with purpose, like, is your purpose and that actualization of your purpose, in motion, if you had it, put it into like a verb, is that like your version of success, is being the truest
Mm.
expression of yourself, or getting the opportunity to live? And that's part of my gratefulness that I came in with today, is like being the fullest expression of myself is really like what I found. Like you said, it wasn't a clear path, but I was like, I think that's what my definition of success is. And when I know I'm living my purpose is when I feel like I'm the truest expression of myself. Which, when I go back to the tools I use with clients, which is, my little Venn diagram, and you kind of it's like values, your core values, what are your unique abilities or strengths, your magic, things that give you energy, and then working within like your passion
Mhm.
areas. And even if it's not all about work, even like if your life is like a full rounded life, like maybe it's volunteering or
Yeah.
hobbies or whatever that fills it all out, being like what I can, like you said, you worked backwards into those.
Mhm.
And I worked through those to this, and we both got to the same
Yeah.
place, which I think is just like so cool.
Yeah.
But one of the practices that I want to offer to our listeners, if you're like, where do I start with this? If I do want to clear time and space and not start with a core values exercise, not that those are bad, like go ahead and do them. But I think, Rosa, we might have talked about this in the last couple of weeks, that I have a new morning practice that I do that I'm just testing out on myself to see
Mhm.
what it does. And I've been doing it for a little over a month now, and I really like it. I'm just asking myself 2 questions every morning. And if I don't have a chance to do it in the morning, I do it in my head before bed. And what do I want? And why do I want it? Because
Mm.
I'm pulling this, in terms of your
Mhm.
story, it was like, I think I want to go into coaching, but there's this and this, like all you think of all the steps and all the barriers and all the time. And
Mhm.
like how it's like, we don't know the how, and the
Mhm.
how stops us because either it's too much or we don't know, especially like you talked about this uncharted path sometimes we're stepping
Yeah.
into, and to be brave enough to step into an uncharted path. And so this is totally tied with that self-trust piece too, that I just want to bring back into, of just saying, what do you want? Why do you want it? And then like trusting that that's enough to
Mhm.
keep, moving you forward. And then as just the exercise, how I end it is because after those 2 questions, I really was trying to concentrate on having like an abundance mindset. And I also like, in terms of jargon, I'm like, oh, that's so overdone and overplayed. But like, what is that? And how do you, because I just know I don't want to come at it from fear or scarcity. When I'm saying like my deepest heart's desire in my journal that I don't say to anybody else,
Mhm.
it's like, what do I want? Why do I want it? And I'm trying to stay in a place of love with it instead of fear or scarcity. So then I end with 3 things I'm grateful for. And I say, and I literally write out, I am grateful for blah, blah, blah. I am grateful for, and 3 things. And so when I stop the practice, I'm like, I'm doing this out of love and that gratefulness. So that's what, if you're listening, I mean,
Yeah.
give it a try. It's an invitation. You don't have to give it a try, but it's just an invitation, because it really,
Yeah.
I have found that it's really helping me. I'm really surprised at what comes out of my head, especially as I've done it over time. And I do think it's helping me provide like more clarity around what it is compared to what I
Mhm.
thought it was.
Mhm.
Because even as I've gone on my path similarly, like because we both became coaches, so similar thing, like I became a coach because it's really this full expression of me. And then it's changed what I want and why I want it, just from because life is dynamic and every
Mhm.
one of us is constantly in process and changing and going through different chapters of our lives. So it's like it's never like a set it and forget it, I guess, if I just had to say that in one sentence. That it's like
Right.
you don't map it out and be like, okay, I'm the fullest expression of myself now. Check. We're always a series of becoming. I think we might have even talked about that in a previous episode, that it's like this sense of becoming, but also that sense of coming home to
Yeah.
yourself at the same time, which is always,
Yeah, I
changing.
thank you for articulating that. I think that's an important thing to stay oriented to, is that it's not a you figure it out and you're done. It's a constant deepening and opening and evolving. And I love the practice. And I'd like to add one small note to it, because I think even that might, for some people, feel like too much in your head, and I'm not quite sure what I
Yeah.
want or why, and it
Yeah.
might. So if you're a person that, I would encourage, first of all, the invitation to just try it and see what happens. But if you find that it's not, you're not connecting with it for any reason, even just starting smaller, even just thinking each day, what's one thing that I'm grateful for today? And not just, don't try to let that thing that you're grateful for, that feeling of gratitude, actually fill your whole body, not just stay in your head if you can. Another simple practice, even if you can just do one thing, is just maybe stop yourself once, twice, three times during the day and say, what do I want right now? Maybe it's a drink of water. Maybe it's to
Mhm.
stand up from your chair, and maybe you don't have to get further than that, but just to recognize, like, what does your body need or want right now? What does your heart need or want right now? You know? And so these are small ways in. And even if that's maybe much, maybe can you just stop and focus on your breath and give yourself just a moment of space for quiet, for stillness, and just, get curious about what comes up in those moments.
Yeah. Yeah. Thank you for that, Rosal. And you know, we're getting towards the end of our time. So I want to check in, Rosala, with you about, if there's
Yeah.
anything else. But I also want to say, Rosala has a guided practice, at the end of all of our episodes, we do a guided practice. And this is another one that you can do right now with us together or listen to later. It's really another way into that listening. And I just love that you ended with that, Rosala, about, just getting quiet and listening and just see what comes up. And I feel like this guided practice you have queued up is just like that.
Yeah, I think it will be. I mean, it's an experiment. We'll see.
Yeah, yes. It's all an experiment. Let's just say that
We'll
about
see.
everything in life.
We'll see what happens. And I think one last thing that's been tumbling around in my head that might be a bit of a diversion, but just before we move into the practice, I also want to acknowledge that, you know, for me, the sense of purpose is kind of foundational, because it's just how I orient to life.
Yeah.
And I think it does help us sort of move through life in a way that can feel more meaningful and help us feel more energized and alive. And I recognize that not everybody orients that way. And so sometimes sense of purpose, it maybe isn't the whole big thing that you're supposed to be doing with your life. It's
Mhm.
maybe just the, why do I get out of bed in the morning? What matters to me? And maybe that is enough. Maybe just
Mhm.
like, although from my perspective, I probably think I could start to find some through lines, but I don't know how necessary that is. I think that's an open question. And
Mhm.
and I'd actually really love to hear comments and questions or experiences that any of the listeners have that are willing to share, because this is an ongoing exploration for me. And, I think it probably always will be in my life.
And that's an invitation to all of you to contact us. You can put like comments in the comment section. Our email addresses are available in the description, so you can email us. if you do have a question or a comment or something related to this episode or anything you want to hear about in the future. So that is a really good for that. And before we move into the practice too, how you to normalize, that not everyone needs to have a purpose is great because, it's like that pressure sometimes that we have both acknowledged that we felt
Mhm.
like we should have it and we don't, and therefore something's wrong with us. But there is something innate about humans that humans crave meaning, and that's what like makes us feel better, like any whatever you
Mhm.
want to call it, happier, satisfied, whatever that meaning. So it's like I think that's what you're alluding to with like the whatever, gets you up in the morning that brings meaning to your life. And maybe it's a pet or maybe it's a,
Yep.
whatever it is, it's like find just what makes you feel good.
Yeah.
And like what is that in terms of like that expression of yourself?
Right. Well, I think that's a great way to sort of cap off the conversation, and let's move into a practice.
Sounds
Right.
wonderful.
Okay, so once again, for this one, I am going to actually invite everyone to stay seated, or if you're in a place that allows and you feel more comfortable, go ahead and recline. Um, but what I want you to try to do is get into a place where you can have your your upper body sort of whether you can find a way to be supported on your own frame or supported in a chair or supported by the floor. But I'd like to invite you to find a way that you can feel relaxed, have your spine nice and open, and just settle in. And I'll invite you to close your eyes for this one if that's comfortable for you. If not, just go ahead and soften your gaze just a little. And as you sort of sink into your chair or the ground, let your attention come into your breath, just noticing where it is right now. And see if you can allow your breath to slow just a bit, become just a little deeper, allowing it to move into your belly or low lungs. Maybe imagining the core of your body being a balloon that's expanding and contracting as you breathe in and out. Letting your attention come down into the hips and pelvic bowl area, maybe even visualizing a bowl and noticing if the bowl is sitting level or tilted. Noticing the spaciousness of the opening of the bowl. Coming back up through that balloon. And noticing how it expands up even into your upper lungs and throat. Allowing yourself to continue to soften and open and be supported as the breath gently flows in and out without effort or force. Just allowing yourself to receive that air coming in and gently give back. Now I'm going to invite you to bring your attention up into your head. Think of the space behind your face and through your skull. Notice all of that space there. And while you're here with this space, I'm going to invite you to bring up the concept of rain. And just notice what comes up for you as you hold the idea of rain here in your head. And as you take another deep breath and let that out, I'll invite you to move your focus down into your heart space. Again, noticing the sense of support that you have at your back, the opening and spaciousness here, where you can find it in this heart space. And from here, I'll invite you to bring that concept of rain back and hold it here in the space of your heart. Noticing what arises, letting go of expectations, what should be, allowing yourself to follow your curiosity. And once again, I'll invite you to take another deep cleansing breath. Allow your attention to drop down into your belly, into that pelvic bowl. And let your attention just sort of swim around in that bowl for a moment. And once you feel comfortable here, I invite you to bring back one more time the concept of rain. Allow that concept to be held with you in the bowl. And notice what you experience from here. Letting go of any judgments about what you think should be happening. And when you're ready, I'll invite you to let go of that and orient to what you'd like to take away from this experience. Maybe there were distinctions between the different areas, and there's some curiosity or meaning making that's happening. Maybe you didn't experience anything. I wonder if you can be curious and open with that as well. And as you release this meditation, I'm going to invite you to just take one or two more deep cleansing breaths with an invitation to just notice what is for you right now. And to open your eyes and let that go when you're ready. And with that, we are complete.
Thanks for listening. We want to hear from you. Drop us a comment on what you'd like to hear more about or questions you may have. We value your input and we'll work those topics into future episodes.
If you enjoyed this episode, please share it with others. Like, subscribe, and leave a rating and review. It would go a long way in helping us spread the word about the Presence Hour podcast. Thanks again, and we'll see you next time.